Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Before we dive into today's story, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit that subscribe button and leave a comment down below. Caught her at a coffee shop with another man. Left a note. Don't come home, it's strange how one ordinary afternoon can shatter everything you thought you knew about your life. I wasn't planning to leave work early that day. I wasn't planning anything special, really. Just a simple surprise. Flowers, coffee, a chance to reconnect with my wife. We'd been distant lately, the kind of distance that creeps in quietly and settles between two people like fog. She said it was work stress. Long hours, tight deadlines. I believed her. I wanted to believe her. But standing outside that cafe, watching her through the glass, I realized how blind I'd been. There she was, my wife, sitting across from another man. Their heads leaned close, her laughter light and easy in a way I hadn't heard in years. His hand rested casually over hers, like it had done 1,000 times before. There was something in that moment, something I couldn't unsee. A familiarity and intimacy that went beyond friendship. It wasn't work. It wasn't stress. It wasn't an innocent meeting. I stood there, frozen. 1,000 thoughts raced through my mind, but none of them made sense. I told myself I was imagining things, that it was a misunderstanding. But deep down, I knew. I knew exactly what I was seeing. I could have walked away, pretended I hadn't seen anything, given her the benefit of the doubt. But something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to ignore it. I wasn't going to give her that power. I reached into my pocket, pulling out the small piece of paper I'd scribbled on while sitting in the car. For simple words. Don't come home. I stepped inside, the bell above the door chiming softly. They didn't notice me at first, too lost in their conversation, too comfortable in each other's company. But when my shadow crossed their table, she looked up, her smile faltered. Her hand jerked back from his, like she could somehow undo the moment, erase the evidence. The man, tall, well-dressed, and far too calm, just stared, his expression unreadable. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. I placed the note on the table right in front of her. Her eyes dropped to the paper, widening as she read the words. The color drained from her face, but I didn't stick around to see what excuses she would offer. I left the flowers on the table, an afterthought now, and walked out. She called after me, but I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I sat in my car for what felt like hours, hands gripping the wheel until they ached. My mind raced, questions spinning in circles. Who was he? How long had it been going on? Had it started with one innocent meeting, or had it always been more? But none of the answers mattered. Not right now. What mattered was that she had made her choice, and I had made mine. I drove home in silence. The house felt cold, empty. Her scent still lingered in the rooms, a cruel reminder of the woman I thought I knew. I sat on the couch, staring at the blank TV screen, playing the scene over and over in my head. The laughter, the way she looked at him, the way she didn't notice me until it was too late. Hours passed. Darkness crept in. And then, the sound of the front door. She walked in like nothing had happened. Calm, composed. She wasn't holding the note. She didn't look guilty. If anything, she looked rehearsed. Prepared. "We need to talk," she said, dropping her purse by the door. I didn't move. I didn't even look at her. "It's not what you think," she said, stepping closer, her voice soft. Careful that I turned my head slowly, finally meeting her gaze. "Then tell me," I said, because what I saw looked a lot like my wife holding hands with another man. Her mouth opened, but no words came. Not at first. Then finally, "It's not serious. It's complicated." I laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It wasn't even angry. It was hollow, empty. "Complicated? You think that makes it better?" She flinched but didn't back down. "I didn't plan for this to happen. It just did." I stood up, feeling the weight of every lie she had told. "How long?" She hesitated, and that hesitation was answer enough. "Get out," I said quietly, her eyes widened. "Mark, please." No, my voice was steel. "You made your choice. Now live with it. Pack your things and go." For a moment, she stood there, staring at me, like she didn't believe it, like she thought I'd break, that I'd forgive her, that I'd accept her lies. But I didn't. Finally, she nodded. She turned and walked up the stairs, her steps slow, heavy. I sat back down, listening to the sound of drawers opening and closing. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel anything. She came back down half an hour later, a single suitcase in hand. She paused by the door, like she wanted to say something, but I didn't give her the chance. "Where will you go?" I asked, though I didn't know why I cared. "A friend's," she said quietly. "Is it him?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The silence told me everything without another word. She walked out, leaving me alone in the house that now felt too big, too empty. That I sat there for a long time, staring at the door, at the space she had left behind. I should have felt relief. Maybe I did. But it didn't feel like victory. It didn't feel like justice. It just felt like the end. Or at least, I thought it was the end. But that night, my phone buzzed with a message that changed everything. It was from an unknown number. Simple. Direct. "You did the right thing. She's not worth it. Check your email." I stared at the screen, my heart hammering in my chest. I didn't know who it was. I didn't know why they were reaching out to me. But I knew one thing for sure, that I was about to find out just how deep her betrayal went. I sat there for a long moment, staring at my phone. The message felt like a punch to the gut. Who would send something like that? How did they know? My mind raced with possibilities. A friend? Someone who had seen them together? Or maybe it was someone closer, someone who knew more than I did. The curiosity gnawed at me, but fear lingered just beneath the surface. Did I really want to know more? Could I handle it if there was more to know? The weight of betrayal already pressed heavy on me, but I couldn't ignore it, couldn't walk away. Not now. I opened my laptop, my hands trembling as I logged into my email. And there it was, a single message with a subject line that made my breath catch. The truth about her. I hesitated. My finger hovered over the mouse, the screen blurring slightly as my eyes burned with the threat of unshed tears. I could close it, pretend I never saw it. But deep down, I already knew I couldn't do that. I needed to know, even if it destroyed me. I clicked it open, and the first thing I saw were pictures. Dozens of them, each one a fresh wound. Her with him, not just in cafes, not just laughing over coffee, but walking into hotels, coming out hours later, sitting too close on park benches, his arm around her shoulders, kissing when they thought no one was watching. My chest tightened as I clicked through the images, the timestamps cutting deeper than any words could. This hadn't been a momentary mistake. This had been going on for months. Months of lies, of excuses. Months of me being the fool. But the worst part wasn't the pictures. It was the video. It started with laughter, hers, light and carefree. And then her voice, clear and unmistakable. "He'll never find out," she said, chuckling. "He's too trusting." I slammed the laptop shut, my pulse thundering in my ears. The words echoed in my mind, over and over, slicing me open from the inside out. She didn't just cheat. She mocked me. She laughed at me. She built her lies on my trust, my love, my belief in her. And she thought I'd never know. I sat there, staring at nothing, the silence in the room pressing down on me. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I felt numb, empty, like I'd been hollowed out. But underneath that emptiness, something else stirred. Anger, rage, not just at her but at myself, for believing her lies, for letting her walk out that door earlier like it was nothing, like she hadn't just destroyed everything we built together. My phone buzzed again, jolting me from my thoughts. Another message from the same unknown number. "You deserve better. If you want the full truth, meet me tomorrow. The park near your house. 2 p.m. Black hoodie." I stared at the message, my pulse quickening. A meeting? With a stranger? Was I really that desperate? The answer came immediately. Yes, I was. I needed to know. I needed answers. And if this person had them, I was going to listen. The next day was a blur. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. couldn't. My mind was too tangled, caught between fury and disbelief. When 1:45 p.m. rolled around, I was already at the park, sitting in my car, watching the entrance. The world felt distant, muted, like I was watching it through glass. I kept telling myself I was crazy, that this was a mistake, that meeting a stranger like this was reckless. But I stayed, because as much as I wanted to turn away, the need to know was stronger. Stronger than fear, stronger than pride, stronger than anything. At exactly 2 p.m., I saw him, a man in a black hoodie, walking toward a bench beneath a tall oak tree. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, and got out of the car. My steps felt heavy, like I was walking through molasses, but I kept moving until I stood in front of him. He looked up, and though the hood shadowed his face, I could tell I didn't recognize him. But there was something in his eyes, something sharp, something cold. "You're him?" he asked, his voice low. "Yeah," I said, folding my arms. "Who are you?" He motioned to the bench. "Sit, I'll tell you." I hesitated but sat down, keeping a careful distance. My instincts screamed at me to be cautious, but curiosity burned stronger. "How do you know her?" I asked. He chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "I used to work with her. We were close. Not like him," he added quickly, as if to clarify. "But I saw things. Things you need to know." He pulled out his phone and handed it to me. On the screen was a series of messages, texts, between her and someone saved as Eric. My stomach churned as I scrolled. They weren't just texts. They were confessions, plans, desires, meetings, lies. "She's been seeing him for nearly a year," the man said, his voice low. "She thinks she's careful. She's not." I kept scrolling, the words blurring together, but their meaning sharp and clear. They mocked me, lied about me, planned around me, and worst of all, they didn't care. They didn't think I'd ever find out. Or maybe they didn't care if I did. I looked up at the man, my voice raw. "Why are you telling me this? Why now?" He shrugged, but there was bitterness in his eyes. "Because I know what it's like, to be lied to be played for a fool. And because someone should have told me the truth when I was in your shoes." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to thank him. Part of me wanted to punch something. Everything felt unreal, like I was trapped in someone else's nightmare. He took his phone back, slipping it into his pocket. "She's not going to stop," he said. "People like her, they don't change. They just get better at hiding it." His words hit me like a hammer. I stood up, the weight of it all pressing down on me. "Thanks," I said quietly, though the word felt hollow. He nodded but didn't stand. "Good luck," he said simply. That I walked back to my car, my mind spinning. Every step felt heavier than the last. I didn't want to believe him. I didn't want to believe the messages, the pictures, the videos. But the truth was inescapable. She had lied. She had cheated. She had made a mockery of everything we had. And she thought she could walk away from it like it was nothing. But she was wrong. I wasn't going to let her walk away clean. She had built her lies on my trust, and I was going to tear it all down. By the time I got home, my hands were shaking. But not from fear, from clarity. I grabbed my laptop and started digging. Her lover had a name now, Eric, and it didn't take long to find him. Social media made it easy. His profile was polished, perfect. Family photos, smiling kids, a wife who looked like she had no idea what her husband was really doing. I stared at those pictures for a long time, imagining her, imagining the betrayal she didn't even know was happening. Yet I saved every screenshot, every post, every piece of evidence I could find. I didn't know what I'd do with it yet, but I knew one thing for sure. She thought she was safe. She thought her lies would stay buried. But she was wrong. She had underestimated me. They both had, but not for much longer. The following day felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, staring into the unknown. I didn't sleep, barely ate. My mind replayed every moment, every conversation, every late-night excuse she'd ever given me. It all made sense now, fitting together like sharp, jagged pieces of a puzzle I never wanted to solve. The lies were everywhere, woven into the fabric of our life. Every smile, every kiss, every whispered promise, it was all poisoned. And now I wasn't just facing betrayal. I was facing the reality that I'd been living a lie for almost a year. By morning, the numbness had faded. In its place was something sharper, colder. Determination. She thought she could cheat and lie, walk out of my life, and leave me to pick up the pieces. But I wasn't going to let that happen. I wasn't going to be her victim. I was going to be her reckoning. And his too. I spent hours gathering everything. The photos, the messages, the videos. Every scrap of evidence that painted the truth so clearly it burned. I printed it all, laying it out on the dining table like pieces of a crime scene. And in a way, that's exactly what it was. A crime against trust. Against love. Against me. I stared at the images for a long time, letting the rage simmer. Not to consume me, but to fuel me. Because if there was one thing I was certain of, it was this: they weren't walking away from this untouched. Around midday, my phone buzzed. Her name flashed across the screen. The audacity made my blood boil. I let it ring. Then another message. Calm. Casual. Like none of it mattered. I need to come by and pick up the rest of my things. Will you be home? I stared at the words, the sheer nerve of her making me want to tear the phone apart. She thought she could just walk in, collect her belongings, and walk out like she wasn't the reason my life was in ruins. She thought she could avoid the confrontation. That she could dodge the truth. She was wrong. I replied simply. I'll be here. 5 o'clock. No emotion. No anger. Just facts. But beneath the calm words, my mind raced. She was coming back into my home. And this time she wouldn't be walking out the same way. Not after what I had prepared for her. The rest of the afternoon dragged. Every second felt heavier, weighed down by anticipation. I kept pacing the room, my eyes flicking to the clock every few minutes. 5 o'clock couldn't come fast enough. And when it did, I was ready. I heard the soft knock on the door. Calm. Controlled. Like it was just another day. I took a breath, steadying the storm inside me, and opened it. There she was. Polished. Collected. Like she hadn't just burned our life to the ground. Her eyes met mine, and I saw a flicker of something. Regret? Fear? Or maybe just annoyance that I wasn't going to make this easy for her. I'm just here to grab my stuff, she said, her voice cool, almost dismissive. She moved to walk past me, but I stepped in her way. Not so fast, I said, my voice low. Calm. Dangerous. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Mark, we've been through this. I don't want to fight. I chuckled, but there was no humor in it. Good. I'm not interested in fighting either. I'm interested in the truth. Her gaze flicked to the dining table, and I saw it. The moment her calm cracked. The pile of papers. The photos. The evidence. She froze. Sit, I said, motioning to the chair. She hesitated, but she knew better than to argue. Slowly, she crossed the room and sat down, her hands fidgeting in her lap. She didn't speak, but her eyes stayed locked on the papers. Like they could somehow change if she stared long enough. Like the truth could rewrite itself. I sat across from her, leaning forward, my arms resting on the table. You know what this is? I said quietly. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. The guilt was already written all over her face. I thought you'd like to see just how well you covered your tracks. Her mouth opened, but no words came. Instead, her eyes scanned the table, picture after picture of her with him. The hotel entrances. The stolen kisses. The nights she said she was working late. The lies. Every single one of them laid bare between us. How long? I asked. The question felt like a blade, sharp and merciless. She swallowed hard. It doesn't matter, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I laughed again, but it was hollow. Bitter. It matters to me. She looked up then, and for the first time I saw real fear in her eyes. Not fear of me, but fear of exposure. Fear of losing control. She hesitated, then spoke. Almost a year. The words hit harder than I expected. A year. 12 months of my life spent loving someone who was lying to my face. I leaned back, crossing my arms. Why? It was a simple question, but it weighed a ton. She shook her head, her gaze dropping to the table. I don't know. I didn't plan it. You didn't plan it? I echoed. You didn't plan the hotel stays? The texts? The lies? What was it then? An accident. Her silence was answer enough. I stood, pushing back from the table. I couldn't sit still any longer. My anger was too close, too sharp. I needed to move, to breathe, to not look at her. But I couldn't stop my words. I gave you everything. Everything. And you threw it away for what? For him. She finally looked up. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that, I snapped. You thought I wouldn't find out. You thought you could laugh at me behind my back and I'd stay blind. But I know now. I know everything. Her face paled, but she didn't deny it. She didn't even try. "I'm sorry," she whispered. But the words felt empty. Like ashes. "No, you're not," I said coldly. "You're sorry you got caught. You're sorry this is happening now. But you weren't sorry when you walked into those hotels. You weren't sorry when you lied to my face. You weren't sorry then." She didn't respond. She just sat there, silent, small. I stared at her, the woman I thought I loved, and felt nothing. Not love, not pain. Just the hollow shadow they'd left behind. "You can go," I said finally. "Take your things and leave." She stood slowly, gathering her bag, her movements stiff. Robotic. She paused at the door like she wanted to say something, but I didn't let her. "Don't," I said. "There's nothing left to say." And then she was gone. The door clicked shut and I was alone. But it wasn't over. Not yet. Because as much as I wanted to leave it behind, I couldn't. She didn't just betray me. She mocked me. And him? He thought he was untouchable. I wasn't done. Not yet. I pulled out my laptop, opening the folder of screenshots I'd saved. Eric. The man who thought he could invade my life and walk away clean. The man who thought his lies wouldn't catch up to him. I clicked open his profile again, scrolling through photos of his smiling family. His wife. His children. I stared at the images for a long time, feeling the weight of it settle on me. He wasn't just a liar. He was a coward. And his wife deserved to know the truth. I opened a new email and started typing. The words were simple, direct, undeniable. I attached the photos, the messages, the evidence. And then I wrote the final line. "You deserve to know who your husband really is." I hesitated only for a second before I hit send. I stared at the screen, waiting, but nothing happened. Silence. Emptiness. But I knew that wouldn't last. The truth was out now. And it was only a matter of time before it came crashing down. The night after sending that email stretched on endlessly, thick with anticipation. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I had crossed some unspoken line. But every time doubt crept in, I reminded myself of the images burned into my mind, of her laughter, of his hand over hers, of the hotel rooms and the messages laced with deception. No, I hadn't crossed any line. They had. All I had done was shine a light on it. By morning, I was exhausted, my mind numb from playing out every possible scenario. Would she read it and confront him? Would she ignore it, believing it to be some cruel joke? Would Eric deny it, try to talk his way out of it like a man cornered? I didn't have to wonder long. My phone buzzed just after 8 and my heart leapt into my throat. Unknown number. I hesitated, staring at the screen until the message preview appeared. 3 words. "We need to talk." There was no name, but I knew. I could feel it. Eric's wife. The woman who, until yesterday, was as blind to the truth as I had been. I opened the message. Her words were measured, but I could feel the undercurrent of pain running beneath them. She wanted to meet. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere safe. A place where we could share the silence that came with mutual betrayal. I agreed, setting the time and place. A small coffee shop, far from prying eyes. Neutral ground. The hours until the meeting passed in a blur. I couldn't focus, couldn't settle. I kept replaying it in my head, what I would say, how she would react. Would she hate me for exposing the truth? Would she blame me? Or would she thank me for pulling her from the darkness? When the time came, I arrived early, my heart hammering in my chest as I sat in the corner, facing the door. Every time the bell chimed, I looked up, but it wasn't her. Until it was. She walked in slowly, her eyes scanning the room, and when they landed on me, there was no confusion. She knew exactly who I was. She approached quietly, her steps measured. She sat across from me, her posture tense, hands folded tightly together on the table. Her face was pale, but her eyes were sharp, determined. "Thank you for meeting me," I said, though the words felt inadequate. She nodded, but didn't speak for a long moment. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a printed photo. One of the ones I had sent. She placed it between us. Her husband. My wife. Arm in arm, smiling like nothing in the world could touch them. Her hand trembled as she withdrew it, but her eyes never left mine. "How long?" Her voice was quiet but firm. "Almost a year," I replied, my throat dry. She nodded slightly, as if confirming something she already suspected. I thought maybe it was just me. That I was imagining things." Her voice cracked slightly, but she didn't cry. She looked like she'd done enough of that already. "You weren't," I said gently. "They lied to both of us." Silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. She looked down at her hands, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of the napkin. "I don't know how to face him," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to look at him and pretend I didn't see this. I don't know how to pretend I didn't know. I didn't have an answer. I didn't know how to face any of this either." I barely knew how to sit there, breathing, as the weight of betrayal crushed down on both of us. You don't have to pretend, I said softly. Not anymore. She looked up, and for the first time, her eyes weren't sharp. They were broken. Vulnerable. I feel like such a fool, she whispered. And I knew exactly how she felt. We sat in silence after that, drinking cold coffee and trying to find words that didn't exist. Eventually, she looked at me again, her face resolute. They think they've gotten away with it, she said. They think they can move on and leave us behind. But they're wrong. There was steel in her voice now, strength hidden beneath the pain. And I understood. I felt it too. That need for justice. That need to make them feel a fraction of the pain they'd caused. What are you thinking? I asked, though I already knew. They deserve to be exposed, she said, her voice calm. Controlled. Not just between us, but for everyone to see. They don't get to walk away from this like nothing happened. I nodded slowly, understanding the weight of what she meant. I agree, I said. But how? She hesitated, then pulled out her phone and slid it across the table. Texts. Photos. Messages between them that she had gathered from his phone. Proof. Evidence. Betrayal documented piece by piece. He's been careless, she said quietly. And now he's going to pay for it. The plan came together slowly, born from pain but sharpened by determination. We wouldn't just expose them in whispers and rumors. We'd show the truth. We'd lay it bare for everyone to see. Their friends. Their colleagues. Their families. No more secrets. No more hiding. They chose this. They walked into it with open eyes. They wanted to risk everything. Now they'd lose everything. We left the cafe with a silent understanding. There wasn't joy in it or satisfaction. Only the cold, hard knowledge that we were doing what had to be done. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my dining table, staring at the photos and texts, wondering how it had come to this. Wondering how two people could be so reckless. So cruel. Wondering how I could have missed it all. But there was no answer. Only resolve. The next morning, it began. She confronted him first. I wasn't there, but I didn't need to be. She told me about it later, her voice steady but raw. He denied it at first, of course. Tried to twist the truth, reshape it. But when faced with the evidence, the lies fell apart. And when she mentioned my name, when she told him I knew too, the panic started to show. She said he crumbled. Said his words got messy. Desperate. But there was no escaping it. The truth was out. And he wasn't prepared. Not for the consequences. Not for what came next. I didn't hear from her until later that evening. But I did hear from someone else. Him. Eric. His number lit up my screen, an unfamiliar number but a message I saw coming from a mile away. You don't know what you're doing. Stay out of it. I stared at the words, the threat behind them so thin it was laughable. I didn't reply. There was nothing to say. But I saved the message. Just another piece of the puzzle. Another nail in the coffin they'd built for themselves. And I waited. Because I knew it wasn't over. Not yet. It was just beginning. By the time my wife showed up at my door that night, I was ready. She looked different. Gone was the calm, composed woman from before. Now she looked raw. Shaken. Desperate. She stepped inside without waiting for permission, her eyes wild. What did you do? She demanded, her voice low and angry. I didn't flinch. I didn't back down. I looked her straight in the eye. I told the truth, I said simply. She stared at me, her breath shaky. You've ruined everything, she whispered. I shook my head slowly. No. You did that all by yourself. She opened her mouth to argue, but I held up my hand. Don't. You made your choice. And now you live with it. For a long moment, we stood there, two strangers facing the wreckage of a life we once shared. And then, without another word, she turned and walked out. And I didn't stop her. The days that followed were anything but quiet. The ripple effect of the confrontation spread faster than I expected. My phone buzzed relentlessly. Messages from mutual friends, from acquaintances, even from people I hadn't spoken to in years. Some wanted to know what happened, their curiosity thinly veiled behind faux concern. Others had heard fragments of the story and wanted the full picture. But most, it seemed, wanted to take sides. That was the part one hadn't expected. The way people chose their alliances, how they decided who the villain was based on half-truths and whispers. Some reached out to comfort me, to say they were sorry for what I'd gone through. Others were less kind, accusing me of airing dirty laundry, of dragging it out into the public when it should have stayed private. They questioned why I exposed Eric, why I involved his family. They didn't understand that I hadn't caused this. I hadn't created the affair. I hadn't lied and cheated and torn apart two families. I had only revealed the truth. But apparently that made me the villain in some people's eyes. I stopped responding to messages after the first day. There was no point. I wasn't going to explain myself to people who didn't care about the truth, only the gossip. Instead, I focused on the fallout. Eric had gone quiet. After his threatening message, there was nothing. No more calls, no more attempts to defend himself. I imagined his life was unraveling just as quickly as mine had. Good. He deserved that. But Linda, she wasn't silent. She tried calling. She tried texting. First, she begged for forgiveness, saying we could still fix this, that it didn't have to end like this. When I didn't respond, her messages turned angry. She accused me of ruining her life, of turning people against her, of exposing something that should have been kept private. But I didn't answer her. There was nothing left to say. She made her choices. Now she had to live with them. But even as I tried to shut her out, the confrontation wasn't over. She showed up at my house again, 2 days after the last message. She didn't knock this time. She pounded on the door, loud and desperate, like a woman on the edge of losing everything. I didn't want to open it. I wanted her gone from my life completely, but I couldn't pretend she wasn't there. I couldn't ignore the storm outside my door forever. So I opened it, and there she was. Her eyes were red, her hair messy, her face pale. She looked like a ghost of the woman I once knew. "Why are you doing this?" she demanded, stepping inside before I could stop her. "Why are you trying to destroy me?" Her voice shook, a mixture of fear and anger. But I didn't flinch. I didn't back down. I stood my ground, arms crossed, watching her fall apart. "I didn't destroy you," I said evenly. "You did that all on your own." She stared at me, disbelief flickering across her face. "It didn't have to be like this," she said, her voice breaking. "We could have worked through it. We could have fixed it." I laughed, a sharp, humorless sound that filled the quiet room. "Fixed what? Your affair? The lies? The hotels? The messages? Tell me, how are we going to fix that?" She didn't have an answer. Her mouth opened, then closed, and I saw the truth in her eyes. She didn't want to fix anything. She wanted to avoid the consequences. She wanted to sweep it all under the rug and pretend it hadn't happened. "You exposed Eric," she said, her tone shifting, turning sharper. "You humiliated him. His family." "No," I said firmly. "He did that. He chose to betray his wife, just like you chose to betray me. I just told the truth." Her face twisted, her eyes flashing with something that might have been guilt or rage. Maybe both. "You don't understand," she said. "It wasn't supposed to go this far." I stepped closer, my voice low, controlled. "It was never supposed to happen at all. But you did it. You kept doing it. You laughed at me behind my back. You lied to my face. You don't get to be the victim now." Her shoulders slumped as though the weight of it all had finally crashed down on her. She looked so small standing there, so defeated. And for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered the pictures, the messages, the sound of her laughter in that video, mocking me. No, I didn't feel sorry. Not anymore. "What do you want from me?" I asked quietly. She looked up, her eyes glossy, her voice trembling. "I don't know," she admitted, and I believed her. She didn't know. She wanted to rewind time to erase her mistakes. But that wasn't how life worked. "There's nothing left to say," I told her. "It's over." She nodded slowly, the finality of it sinking in. She turned toward the door, her steps heavy, but before she left, she paused. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she whispered, but I didn't respond, because it didn't matter. She walked out, and this time I didn't watch her go. I just closed the door and locked it behind her. Not just to keep her out, but to keep everything she represented from creeping back into my life. But the battle wasn't over. The next day, I received another message. This one from Michelle. She'd confronted Eric again, and it hadn't gone well. He tried to deflect, to twist the blame, but the evidence was undeniable, and she wasn't backing down. "I'm tired of the lies," she said in her message. He doesn't get to walk away from this like nothing happened. Her words echoed my own thoughts. She wasn't just angry. She was ready to fight, and I respected that. I called her later that evening. We talked for over an hour, sharing the quiet misery that only comes from shared betrayal. By the end of the call, she said something I wasn't expecting. "We need to take this further." I didn't understand at first. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, then said, "Eric's company. They have a strict policy about workplace relationships, about affairs, and Linda's work is connected too. If we expose this, they could face real consequences. Not just gossip, not just whispers, real accountability." Felt harsh, too far. But as I thought about it, the more I understood. They hadn't just lied to us. They had lied to everyone. They'd built their lives on deception, not caring about who they hurt along the way. And now they deserved to face the consequences. So I agreed. "Do it," I said. "I'm with you." The next few days were a whirlwind of gathering evidence. Emails, messages, photos, proof that couldn't be denied. We filed the complaints, sent the emails, handed over every scrap of truth we had. And then we waited. It didn't take long. Eric's company launched an investigation almost immediately. Linda's firm followed shortly after. The walls were closing in, and this time, there was no escape. The aftermath was brutal. Eric was placed on leave. Linda was questioned. Their colleagues, their friends, even their families started to pull away. The whispers turned into stares. The rumors turned into facts. And there was no hiding from it anymore. One night, Linda tried calling me again. I let it ring. She left a voicemail, her voice raw with desperation. "You've made your point," she said. "Please, stop this. We can figure it out. We can fix it." But I knew better. There was nothing left to fix. She had destroyed everything. And now she had to face it. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something close to peace. Not because I'd won, but because I'd stood up. Because I didn't let them walk away untouched. They thought they could betray me and escape. But they were wrong. Now, they were the ones. The fallout came faster than I expected. Within a week of the complaints being filed, the walls began closing in on Eric and Linda. Their perfect little world, the one they had built on secrets and lies, started crumbling. Eric was suspended from his company pending a full investigation. Linda's contract with her firm wasn't renewed, and the whispers in her office became loud enough that even her carefully constructed facade couldn't shield her anymore. They had spent so long believing they were untouchable that they could lie and cheat without consequences. But the truth has a way of catching up, and it had arrived on their doorstep like an avalanche. Linda called me again, leaving voicemails that ranged from pleading to furious. First, she begged me to stop, claimed we could talk it out, that I was blowing everything out of proportion. When I didn't respond, her tone changed. She accused me of trying to destroy her, of ruining her life out of spite. It was almost laughable. She didn't realize that I wasn't the one who had destroyed her life. She had done that herself when she chose to betray me, to laugh at me behind my back, to build her world on lies and deception. I had just refused to let her walk away from the wreckage she'd created. Michelle kept me updated. Eric tried to deny everything at first, spinning stories, trying to twist the truth. But with every lie, the evidence stood stronger. Messages, photos, emails, it was all there, impossible to deny. And when the truth became too heavy to carry, Eric finally broke. Not in remorse, but in anger. Anger that he'd been caught. Anger that his carefully curated life was unraveling. Michelle said he tried to blame her. Said she'd been distant. Said it was her fault. The same excuse Linda used on me. The same cowardice. The same refusal to take responsibility, but Michelle didn't back down. Neither did I. We stood our ground and watched as the people who betrayed us stumbled under the weight of their own lies. It wasn't satisfaction we felt, it wasn't even revenge. It was justice. Cold, heavy, and necessary. They made their choices. Now they were living with them. A few days later, Linda showed up at my house again. She wasn't composed this time. She wasn't calm. She looked broken. She looked like the lies were finally too heavy for her to carry. She stepped inside without waiting for me to invite her. I didn't stop her. I just watched. She stood there, in the same living room where we had once built a life together, and she looked around like it was a place she no longer recognized. "You win," she said finally, her voice hollow. "You've destroyed me. I shook my head, crossing my arms over my chest. No, I said quietly. I didn't destroy you. You did that all by yourself. Tears filled her eyes, but I felt nothing. No pity. No regret. Only the dull echo of betrayal. I never meant for it to go this far, she whispered. I didn't want to hurt you. But that was the lie that stung the most. She had meant it. Maybe not at first, but every choice after the first mistake had been deliberate. Every message, every lie, every hotel room. She had chosen it all. She had chosen him. And she had chosen to laugh about it behind my back. You didn't care who you hurt, I said, my voice low. Not until you were caught. She didn't deny it. She didn't have the strength. She just stood there, shaking, as if waiting for me to offer her something: comfort, forgiveness, anything. But I had nothing left to give. I loved you, I said, the words sharp and cold. And you tore that apart. You destroyed it. I know, she whispered. I know. Silence filled the room. Heavy. Unbearable. Finally, she turned to leave. Her hand paused on the doorknob, her shoulders shaking. She didn't look back. She just opened the door and walked out, leaving the door swinging slightly behind her. I didn't close it. I let it hang open, like a wound that still hadn't healed. Michelle called me later that evening. Her voice was tired, worn thin by the weight of everything. But there was something else there too: relief. Eric's company had completed its investigation. He was fired. His name dragged through the dirt, his lies exposed. Linda's firm had cut ties with her. Quietly but decisively. The consequences had caught up with them and there was no escape. They're done, Michelle said softly. It's over. But it didn't feel like a victory. It didn't feel like triumph. It felt empty. Like watching a house burn down that you used to call home. A home that you once loved. A home that you thought would stand forever. We didn't celebrate. There was nothing to celebrate. But there was relief. A quiet, heavy relief that it was finally done. We talked for a while about the fallout, about the aftermath, about where we go from here. And then, before she hung up, she said something that stuck with me. We can't let this define us, she said. It's part of our story, but it's not the whole book. I thought about her words long after the call ended. She was right. I didn't want this to be my story. I didn't want to carry this betrayal forever. I didn't want it to shape who I was or how I lived. It was a chapter. A brutal, painful chapter. But it wasn't the end. The next few weeks were about reclaiming my life. I cleared the house of her things. Her clothes, her photos, her memories. Every trace of her was boxed up and pushed out the door. It wasn't anger. It wasn't revenge. It was survival. Every item was a reminder of a lie, and I needed to breathe in a place where I wasn't drowning in betrayal. I repainted the walls. Bought new furniture. Rearranged the space. It wasn't about hiding what happened. It was about taking back control. About making the space mine again. About creating a new chapter that wasn't haunted by her shadow. It wasn't easy. Some days were harder than others. Some mornings I woke up and felt the weight of it crushing me all over again. Some nights, the memories came back, sharp and brutal, and I had to fight to keep them from swallowing me. But little by little, the weight began to lift. I learned how to breathe again. How to laugh again. How to live again. And through it all, Michelle stayed in touch. She became an unexpected friend. Someone who understood without me having to explain. We met for coffee sometimes, shared stories, checked in. We didn't talk about Eric and Linda much. There wasn't a need. We talked about life, about moving on, about finding peace in a world that had felt anything but peaceful. And slowly, the pain faded. The anger dulled. The betrayal, once sharp and all-consuming, became something quieter. Something that no longer defined me. One day, Michelle said something that stayed with me. We survived it, she said. That's enough. And it was. It didn't erase the past. It didn't undo the pain. But it meant we weren't broken. It meant we weren't defined by what they did to us. We were more than that. I don't think I'll ever forget the way it felt to see her in that cafe with him. I don't think I'll ever fully forget the sound of her laughter or the way she looked at him like I didn't exist. But I've learned that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means learning to live with the scars and choosing to move forward anyway, and that's what I did. I moved forward. One step at a time. I'm not who I was before all this happened. That man is gone. But the man who stood up, who fought for himself, who refused to let betrayal define his life, that's who I am now. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough.